And finally, we've got to be able to fight for ourselves. A country isn't free if it depends upon somebody else to manufacture its weapons of self-defense. And that's why that when I see manufacturing jobs continue to leave our country, I realize there's a matter of urgency about making sure that we don't produce every last thing in this country somewhere else and have to have it imported back to us. I understand we live in a global economy. I'm all for that. Free trade is a great thing, but it isn't free if it isn't fair. And we've seen just this last week what happens when the Chinese aren't under the same kind of regulatory powers that we are, whether it's food or toys or pet food that comes back to us that's not nearly as safe for us as it been produced here. And at some point we're going to have to start saying we'll participate in a global economy, but only when it's going to have an equal playing field for everybody who's participating. And one of the things that has to happen is a real change of understanding when we're going to play that everybody plays by the same set of rules. Part of the reason we keep losing these jobs is because we have excessive taxation, excessive regulation, excessive litigation, and the result is excessive job migration. Those jobs disappear. I'd like to see us completely overhaul our punitive tax system. It's totally out of control. 177,000 pages of the IRS regulation, even they don't understand it. And you certainly don't. That's why you have to hire a cadre of accountants to help you figure it out. And today, $250 billion to $500 billion every year spent in compliance. If we would impose the FairTax and get rid of the current tax code, it would mean we'd eliminate all of the taxes on productivity, income, dividends, savings, capital gains, inheritance. And what we would replace it with is a simple consumption tax that a kid running a lemonade stand could understand. And the difference is the $10 trillion of American capital that's parked offshore could finally return home and get to work in our economy and then in somebody else's. And it would be a totally different day for our economy and system. I long to see the day when, as a country, we once again remember our roots, and particularly as Republicans, that we believe lower taxes are better than higher taxes, that mothers and fathers raise better kids than governments do, that we believe that the best government is the most local government because it's closest to the people. And one thing that has to happen is that we renew that sense of understanding that the 10th Amendment really is a part of our Constitution. You know, for a long time we understood that in the battle between Jefferson and Hamilton, Jefferson won. His idea was that we have very strong states and we don't have an overly focused power vested in a centralized federal government. Hamilton thought, in fact, we needed a very strong centralized federal government and weak states. He didn't trust people out in the local areas and in the states. So they had that battle. Jefferson won, and thus the 10th Amendment. And thus the idea that we would never concentrate too much of our power at the federal level, but instead empower states so that they could make good decisions and become the laboratories of good government, the good ideas which would be shared, the bad ideas which would not be repeated. Now it seems like that the ghost of Alexander Hamilton has come up out of the grave like something out of a bad Frankenstein movie and is haunting us again. And what we need to do as a Republican Party is make sure we get back to our roots and understand that we are a party who does not want to see too much power centralized in a federal authority, but to let states be living laboratories of good government for education, for health care, for transportation, and all of the things that make our states and our people strong. That is a principle that helped us become the majority party and will turn us into the permanent minority party if we're not careful. We've got to once again be the party of ordinary people like people who live in the Midwest and the South and throughout this country. I've often said I'm not a Wall Street Republican. I'm a Main Street Republican. And what I mean by that is that many of us became Republicans not because we favored a particular person on the economic scale, but because we believe that life begins at conception, because we believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that's all it means and nothing but that, and should never mean anything but that, because we believe that parents should have the rights to make decisions about their kids' education, because we want to go back to that time-tested idea that within our communities is our great strength and that our freedoms are built upon the strength of our families, and that if we have weak families, we can never have a strong nation. That's what brought many of us to the Republican Party and will keep us there. I've got a good friend who's a teacher in Arkansas at the Joe T. Robinson High School. Her name is Martha Cothren. And Martha, on the first day of class, 2005, almost exactly 2 years ago this week, having decided that a lot of her kids simply just didn't really appreciate their freedom, decided she'd try a little experiment on the first day of school. So what Martha did was she took all of the desk out of her classroom, every desk removed from her class, first day of school. Kids came in first period, empty class. They walked in, they looked around, they said, "Ms. Cothren, where are our desks?" And she said, "You don't get a desk until you can tell me how you earn one." And the kids said, "Well, I guess we have to make good grades." And she said, "Well, you need to make good grades, but that's not how you get a desk." And so some of them said, "Well, it's our behavior. We have to behave. Then you give us a desk." She says, "Well, you better behave in here, but that's not how you get a desk." Second period came. Nobody figured it out. They'd come in, they'd sit on the floor, stand against the wall. Third period, same thing. By lunch that day, all those kids had called their parents on their cell phones and said, "Ms. Cothren's lost her mind. She's taken the desk out of the classroom." Everyone, we have 4 network-affiliated television stations in Little Rock. All 4 had camera crews out at Joe T. Robinson High School at noon that day to figure out what had happened to this teacher who had taken all the desks from the school and wouldn't let the kids have a place to sit. She held her ground until the last period. Last class, kids filed in. They looked around, no desk. Of course, buzz of the campus is, "What's happened to Miss Cothren? She's gone crazy." Kids came in and sat on the floor, stood against the wall. And she said, "All day I've been asking you to tell me how you get a desk. None of you figured it out." So she said, "I guess I'm going to have to explain it to you." And with that, Martha Cothren walked over to the door of her classroom, and she opened the door. And when she did, in walked 27 veterans, every one of them coming in carrying a school desk. They placed those desks in rows, and when they had finished placing them and setting them up for the class, they stood over against the wall as if at attention. And as they did so, Martha was saying to the students, "Guys, you don't have to earn your desk after all, because these guys, they already did." Martha Cothren told them that every day you come in here and sit in these desks, I want you to never forget that it may be free to you, but it wasn't to these guys and to some of their friends who didn't come back with them. And she went on to explain something I think every student ought to grow up in this country understanding, that we are so blessed to live in this great land. But our freedom wasn't free. It was costly, and it will be costly in the future. And the greatest challenge we have is to be like that generation before us, upon whose shoulders we have lived the good life we've enjoyed, and to realize that our responsibility is not only to protect it and to preserve it, but the greatest responsibility of all is to make sure that we pass it on to the next generation in as good a shape as we found it. Ladies and gentlemen, leadership in this country has got to do more than simply look at where we are. Leadership has got to look at where we're going and to make sure that the next generation coming up, that generation that's perhaps not even born yet, has a better America than the great one that we've inherited and the one for which we are incredibly responsible and had better be grateful to an almighty God for. Thank you and God bless you. It's been a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
Former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney also spoke at the Midwest Republican Leadership Conference. He